Myst, Might, Mayhem. By Han Jung-Wiolia. Chapter 446. Arrangement. Part 1. Heavenly concealed luminous star sword art. Jean Yurin's eyes widened as she saw the characters written on the cover of the book, one of the two items revealed when the wooden box's lid opened. The luminous star sword art could be considered the exclusive martial art of her family, the Jean clan. Such luminous star sword arts existed in various forms, and it was said that the divine path luminous star sword art, known to possess the most perfect sword path and attainable only by reaching the highest realm, was abruptly cut off when the Lord of Mushang Fortress, her grandfather, passed away. But what on earth was this? Heavenly concealed luminous star sword art? This was a name she had never heard of, even from her father, the minor fortress Lord Jin Young-in. Could it be a new luminous star sword art that he had created? As she stood there, unable to easily reach out and touch it, wicked Granny Cheol Surayan spoke with a gentle smile, apparently relieved after a long wait. This is what that person left for you. For me? But that person has already. Yes, that person is no longer here. However, he said long ago that when he had cleansed all his karma, his blood descendants would visit this place. He foresaw that I would come here? Yes, he said that in his later years, he had awakened to the Taoist path and thus became able to read some of the heavenly secrets. He foresaw that great calamities might befall the Central Plains someday, but lamented that he could not intervene as it was a matter of the distant future. So he arranged this? Cheol Surayan nodded in response to her question. That's right. This arrangement. Before she could finish her sentence, Jean Yurin cut her off. Then, with a voice tinged with slight disappointment, she spoke. Is what you said, but why did he just leave the day of the great calamity alone? The day of the great calamity. On that day, Mushang Fortress and the Blood Sect. Everything crumbled, and his descendants lost their lives miserably. Now you speak of arrangement. Young miss. No. Please listen to me first. Her voice, which had been extremely calm, was gradually rising. As Cheol Surayan closed her mouth, she continued her words. Everyone died on the day of the great calamity, and at best, I'm the only surviving blood relative. What exactly did he intend to protect by leaving this arrangement? If he could read the heavenly secrets, shouldn't he have at least prevented the destruction of Mushang Fortress and our clan, even if not the worst calamity? Pack. She roughly grabbed the secret manual of the heavenly concealed luminous star sword art and shook it, speaking with reddened eyes. This can never be called an arrangement. After losing everything, passing on something like this now, how is it any different from urging revenge? This isn't an arrangement, it's the day of the great calamity. Those who came from outside spoke of that day. They said a calamity struck where all sorts of monstrous beings ran wild, causing numerous sects and martial artists to lose their lives. This time, Cheol Surayan interrupted her words. Then, with a deep sigh, she continued. It was truly heartbreaking. While his blood relatives were losing their lives outside, the reality that we knew nothing inside here was so frustrating. I don't misunderstand your feelings. You said you lost your blood relatives and survived alone, so how could anyone put that pain into words? I too am sincerely grieved beyond measure. But on the other hand, it's like this. How much more should he have done for his descendants to be satisfied? What? He already left his blood relatives the most powerful martial organization in the Murim, passed down the highest martial arts of the era, and even bequeathed outstanding talents as an inheritance. Yet despite this, did his blood relatives want him to violate the natural order, remain in the world forever, protect his descendants, watch over them until they grew old and died, and care for them like children? For a moment, she was at a loss for words. She had spoken out of disappointment upon receiving something said to be his arrangement after losing everything due to the day of the great calamity. However, when Cheol Surayan coldly pointed out the reality, she could not give any answer. He has already watched countless times as his old friends and acquaintances all passed away, and even their children grew old, fell ill, and died. Do you think it would be easy to watch his own children and descendants die like that? Despite this, isn't it rather a cruel wish towards him, who could be called your ancestor, to expect him to solve everything that will happen in the future? Ah! At this piercing rebuke, as sharp as a needle killing with an inch of steel, Jean Yurin immediately became dejected. Deep down, she felt too ashamed. She had spoken out of momentary disappointment, but she too believed that Cheol Surayan's words were right. That person, their ancestor, had already left behind everything he could give and departed. The day of the great calamity was something that no one could have done anything about from the beginning, so everyone was inevitably caught up in an unavoidable disaster. Jean Yurin held back the tears that were about to fall and opened her mouth. I apologize. It seems I've spoken too childishly. Cheol Surayan, your words are correct. He has already left us many things. Nevertheless, faced with the reality of being the only one left among the clan, my heart weakened unnecessarily, and I seem to have committed a discourtesy. Please. Suk. As Jean Yurin was about to bow her head in apology, bringing her hands together in a martial salute, Cheol Surayan stopped her and said, No. It's natural to want to lean on something or vent your frustrations when you've lost your entire clan and barely managed to hold on alone. Suk. Cheol Surayan embraced her and said, There's no need to forcibly hide your pain. If the path you've endured alone has been arduous, it's okay to cry for a moment. At these warm words, tears that Jean Yurin had been holding back finally flowed from her eyes. Although she had always maintained a cold demeanor, earning her the nickname Ice Flower even among the Imperial embroidered guards, she had endured the most difficult days alone. Revenge against the beings who caused the day of the great calamity and destroyed her clan. And a sense of mission to revive her clan once again. Bearing all these burdens, she had considered it a luxury to shed tears or show weakness until now, but at this moment, she couldn't help but be overwhelmed with emotion at Cheol Surayan's warm comfort. However, these tears didn't last long. That was because there's no time to keep crying. It was due to Mok Jayangan. Cheol Surayan, who had been consoling Jean Yurin, glared at him with displeasure, but Mok Jayangan didn't care at all. There are still enemies outside. At these words, Jean Yurin, who had been crying, wiped her tears with her sleeve and said, her face slightly flushed with embarrassment. Huh. That's right. I almost forgot about that. Young miss. It's all right. Young Master Mok is right. We don't have time for this right now. She quickly tucked the secret manual of the heavenly concealed luminous star sword art into her bosom. Then, pointing to the rolled-up wooden slips in the wooden box, she asked, What is this? Cheol Surayan showed a puzzled look at her question. That. What's wrong? Actually, I don't know about this either. What do you mean, you don't know? He put it in saying that the one who was meant to have it would naturally come to possess it, but he didn't mention specifically what it was. The one who was meant to have it would come to possess it? What could it be for him to leave such an ambiguous message? Wondering, she picked up the wooden slips and unrolled them. To be precise, since they were made of bamboo, it would be more correct to call them bamboo slips. The bamboo slips unexpectedly contained little content, with only 6 pieces strung together and rolled up, on which 30 Chinese characters were listed haphazardly. At a glance, it was completely incomprehensible what they were saying. Seeing this, she frowned. What on earth is this? Meanwhile, Mok Jayangan, who was observing from a slight distance behind, caught a glimmer in his eye. That is? Mok Jayangan recognized at once what the 30 characters written on the bamboo slips were. It was undoubtedly the formula for the 8 thought-shattering techniques. However, while the arrangement and positioning of the written formulas might seem disorganized to those who didn't know, it felt strangely regular. Moreover, looking at it, there seemed to be something engraved on the side of the bamboo slips, which he wanted to see once. As if sensing this gaze, Jean Yurin asked, Young master, you seem to have a look as if you've seen this before. Do you know what this is? Jin Yiren held out the bamboo slips to mock Jiang'an. Young miss. How can you show that to an outsider? Chiol Surayan hastily tried to stop her. However, no. Young Master Mok is also a disciple of the elder, so strictly speaking, he's not an outsider. And didn't you say, Chiol Surayan? Ah. He put it in saying that the one who was meant to have it would naturally come to possess it, but he didn't mention specifically what it was. Those were her words. At this, Chiol Surayan lowered her hand that had tried to stop her. Then Jin Yiren held out the bamboo slips to mock Jiang'an again and asked, Do you know what this is? Tak. At her question, mock Jiang'an took the bamboo slips and, looking at Chiol Surayan instead of Jin Yiren, said, If you pass on the forbidden technique of merging souls, I'll tell you what this is. Huh? What did you say? Chiol Surayan was dumbfounded at those words. Is this guy really the one who received teachings from that old man Moon Evil Sword? It had been a long time since she'd encountered someone who wouldn't back down and tried to gain something from her, not since the young days of him. But why are this guy and those from outside so hung up on that forbidden technique of merging souls? As she was wondering, Jin Yiren spoke. Chiol Surayan. Yes. I too came here to prevent that forbidden technique from falling into the hands of the group behind the great calamity. If it's all right with you, could you teach it to young Master Mok here? Chiol Surayan stared intently at Mok Jiang'an. Then she nodded. She didn't particularly want to teach it, but it was because of the request from Jin Yiren, who was that person's blood relative. I'll teach you, so you tell the young miss what that is. This is the formula for the 8 thought-shattering techniques. What? At those words, Jin Yiren's eyes, which had no particular expectation for the bamboo slips, widened. She had heard about it, not from her father, the minor fortress lord Jin Yongin, but from floating rumors. Is this the supreme secret manual? At that moment, wicked Granny Chiol Surayan, who was standing beside her, asked in a tone of incomprehension. Supreme secret manual? Yes. I don't know why it was called that, but I heard that at one time, countless people fought and shed great blood to possess this secret manual called the 8 thought-shattering techniques. At these words, Chiol Surayan let out a strange sigh. Huh. Why do you react like that? So it was called that. Did you know about it? Chiol Surayan nodded at Jin Yiren's question. I didn't know that what was in here was what he had mentioned. What do you mean by that? As far as I know, before he left, he spent a long time pondering and left his lifetime of enlightenment melted into the hidden underground secret storage of Mushang Fortress. In the underground secret storage of Mushang Fortress? Yes. But how did it end up here? Rather than how, it seems that he foresaw that this essence of his enlightenment would eventually fall into the hands of others, not his descendants. So, perhaps out of precaution, he put it here as well. Ah. At Chiol Surayan's words, Jin Yiren's expression became strange. That was because it seemed that he had left many things not only for this arrangement but also for future generations. Looking at it this way, despite these various arrangements of his, Mushang Fortress ultimately failed to prevent its annihilation. In the end, even if one can read the heavenly secrets, is an approaching calamity something that cannot be prevented from the beginning? Her mind couldn't help but become complicated. While they were conversing like this, Mok Jiang'an seemed interested in something else and was examining the patterns engraved on the side of the bamboo slips. At first glance, they looked like mere patterns, but they were signifying something. Flowing water, burning fire, this is earth? As he examined this, Mok Jiang'an could be certain of what the 5 engraved patterns were. This was the 5 elements. Fire, water, wood, earth, metal. Although he didn't know why these were engraved on the side, they seemed to be related to the somewhat regular arrangement of the formula for the 8 thought-shattering techniques. Chapter 447. Arrangement. Part 2. The pattern engraved on the thin side of the bamboo slips. It appeared to represent the 5 elements: fire, water, wood, earth, and metal. Although it was unclear why this was engraved on the side, it seemed to be related to the somewhat regular arrangement of the formula for the 8 thought-shattering techniques. Regular arrangement and the 5 elements, this was clearly related. The 8 thought-shattering techniques condensed enlightenment that diverged from the norm into 30 characters, so one had to diversify their perspective to realize new formulas. However, no matter how intently one stared at this, despite its seemingly regular arrangement, no clues about any formula could be found. It doesn't combine. From the start, this arrangement itself didn't fit. It was as if the formula was deliberately tangled to make one conscious of it and interfere. Why? It's strange to do it this way when the formula is tangled. Intentionally made, but the arrangement doesn't fit. Why on earth was it made like this? As he was pondering deeply, Jin Yurin called out to him. Young Master Mok? What is it? Come to think of it, how do you know about this, young Master Mok? This? The 8 thought-shattering techniques, I mean. Even if young Master Mok had heard rumors, you couldn't know whether this is the 8 thought-shattering techniques or not without directly seeing its contents. At these words, Cheol Surayan also agreed and chimed in. That's right. Where on earth did you see the 8 thought-shattering techniques? To know the formula of just 30 characters, unless you've memorized it from the beginning. What kind of answer do you want? What? It happened to fall into my hands while floating around here and there. But are you asking this because you want to dispute ownership now? At Mok Jayangun's words, Cheol Surayan clicked her tongue as if exasperated and raised her voice. Huh? Ownership? You're quite a ridiculous fellow. I don't know how you obtained it, but that formula you came to know is what he condensed his enlightenment into and left for his descendants. Do you know what that means? The true owner of the formula you've learned is naturally only young Miss Jin Yurin, the last blood relative of the Jin family. How absurd. Absurd? You. The very person you claim is the owner just found out about it, yet you're interrogating me about how I know the formula. Enough. At that moment, Jin Yurin intervened, cutting off Mok Jayangun's words. Then, letting out a deep sigh, she said. This isn't an interrogation, and as young master said, I have no intention of disputing ownership over this now. I was just curious about how far what he left in Mushong Fortress's hidden underground secret storage had flowed, so I asked. This was what she really wanted to ask. As it was the supreme secret manual that condensed the enlightenment of her ancestor, not just anyone else, she thought there must be some background to how Mok Jayangun came to know this formula. So she just wanted to know how it had come into Mok Jayangun's hands. It's from Mok Gon, also known as the secret society's leader. At Mok Jayangun's sudden words, her expression immediately hardened. Having shared information between them, she knew that behind the day of the great calamity was an organization called the Secret Society and a leader known as Mok Gon. The Secret Society's leader, what on earth? You said you were curious about how far it had gone, so I told you. It's a fact I learned from fighting with Mok Gon's avatar recently, so it's certain. Mok Gon's avatar? What does that mean? He is. Tuk tuk. Mok Jayangun tapped his forehead with his finger as he continued speaking. A being with a third eye on his forehead. In other words, he's become one with an Imimanjiang. It's fair to say he is essentially the Imimanjiang itself. Imimanjiang. He can implant his mind and will into other bodies and use them as avatars. It's good to know this. His avatars are not just one. There are at least several. And because each avatar shares his will, you can consider them to be almost equal to his main body. Mok Jayangun shared the information he knew, as he had intended to share it anyway. At these words from Mok Jayangun, Jin Yurin clicked her tongue and asked. What did you do with that avatar? Did you let it escape? I killed it. Ah. Jin Yurin couldn't hide her surprise at Mok Jayangun's answer. She had been tracing the remnants of the one who destroyed her clan and caused the day of the great calamity, and had just barely approached an important clue, but Mok Jayangun had already directly encountered him and even fought. Surprised by this, she soon calmed herself and continued speaking. You always surprise me. It's not that surprising since I didn't kill the main body. Still, even indirectly, the fact that you approached a being that shares consciousness is important. She, who had been clicking her tongue, soon returned to the main point. But when I asked how far the secret manual he left behind had been passed on, you mentioned that person, the leader of the secret society. Does that mean he possesses the 8 thought-shattering techniques? Yes. Quack. At Mok Jaeyoun's answer, Jin Yurin bit her lip hard. Wicked Granny Cheol Surayan's expression also twisted terribly. How did this happen? That was because for Cheol Surayan, it was the pinnacle of learning left by him, and for Jin Yurin, it was an arrangement left by her ancestor. And now, this important thing had fallen into the hands of none other than the mastermind behind the day of the great calamity. This fact was enough to enrage them. Young Master Mok, do you perhaps know how it came into the hands of the secret society's leader? I do know. Mok Jaeyoung had heard about the origins of the 8 thought-shattering techniques through Chong Ryong, who knew the origins of the Heaven-Earth-Moon Society. He just didn't know that the organization said to have been destroyed was Mushung Fortress. It was truly coincidental beyond measure. That's how connections are linked in such ways. Due to the secret manual of the destroyed Mushung Fortress, numerous conflicts arose in the martial arts world, and as a result, organizations like the Heaven-Earth-Moon Society and then the Heaven and Earth Society were born. And right before his eyes was the last legitimate descendant of that Mushung Fortress. It felt like numerous branching paths were finally converging into one at the end. How? How did you come to possess that person's enlightenment? Jin Yurin asked, struggling to suppress her anger. This was very important to her. In response, Mok Jaeyoung was about to answer, but then he turned his head towards Wicked Granny Cheol Surayan instead of Jin Yurin and said, "The forbidden technique comes first." What? Cheol Surayan was dumbfounded at Mok Jaeyoung's words. She had already agreed to teach it, so why was this guy so urgently insisting on this? Even Jin Yurin, who was suppressing her anger, couldn't help but express her irritation as Mok Jaeyoung prioritized his own goal in this situation. Young Master Mok. Cheol Surayan already said she would teach it, so why are you? There are enemies outside. And my subordinates are holding them back. I know. I don't intend to stay here for long. Variables can occur at any time. So the forbidden technique comes first. Faced with Mok Jaeyoung's continued firm attitude, Cheol Surayan finally couldn't contain her anger and shouted. You have no sense of moderation. Cheol Surayan. Young miss. This won't do. Whether this person is an outsider or received teachings from Moon Evil Sword isn't important. Without mutual respect, prioritizing only oneself. Cheol Surayan. I'm asking you. Huh. Cheol Surayan let out a sigh at Jin Yurin's earnest request. She felt that Jin Yurin had already given up. Although angry, she understood Jin Yurin's feelings, so Cheol Surayan roughly flipped through an old book shelved in the thatched house's study. Pack. If it weren't for the young miss, I would never have passed this on to you. Mok Jaeyoung silently took the book and quickly flipped through it, skimming the contents. Watching him, Jin Yurin inwardly clicked her tongue. Since they had a common enemy, she ultimately yielded, realizing it was meaningless to quarrel and get red-faced over this, but on the other hand, she was puzzled. While the secret society seemed to be after the forbidden technique to plot something behind the scenes, why was Mok Jaeyoung so intent on obtaining this forbidden technique? Sook. As she was thinking this, Mok Jaeyoung tucked the book on the forbidden technique into his bosom and opened his mouth. I'll explain briefly since we're in a hurry. When Mushung Fortress was destroyed on the day of the Great Calamity, coincidentally, the keeper of the secret storage hidden underground survived. The secret storage keeper? Yes. His name was Yang Bai Ryu. They say he was lucky to survive because he was underground. Yang Bai Ryu, who survived like that, tried for a long time to find a descendant of Mushung Fortress to pass on the 8 thought-shattering techniques. However, he eventually died without finding a descendant of Mushung Fortress. Huh. So that's how the secret manual of the 8 thought-shattering techniques came out into the world? That's the result, yes. After young Bairyu died, his 3 adopted sons apparently fought over it for quite a long time. It even became a power struggle at some point. That was the war that broke out over what the world called the Supreme Secret Manual. Mok Jayangun briefly explained how in this process, the 3 clans made a pact to stop the war, determine the owner of the secret manual, and create a new organization. And in that story, he quickly revealed how the Heaven Earth Moon Society was formed, and then due to the schemes and madness of the secret society's leader, Mok Gon, who took over the body of the Heaven Vein clan's leader, the Moon Vein clan was destroyed, and the current Heaven and Earth Society was formed. Of course, he omitted the detailed anecdotes related to Chong Ryong. Jin Yurin, who heard all of this, couldn't help but feel troubled. How did it come to this? The secret manual containing his enlightenment didn't end up in the hands of her father Jin Yongin, the surviving clan's descendant, but instead floated around in the war between the descendants of the surviving secret storage keeper Yang Bairyu, and finally ended up in the hands of Mok Gon, who destroyed Mushung Fortress. What was interesting in this process was that the Heaven and Earth Society, in a sense, was no different from an organization made up of descendants of Mushung Fortress. Cheol Surayan seemed to have the same thought. I suppose it's fair to say that this Heaven and Earth Society also ultimately derived from Mushung Fortress. That's right. But it's too humiliating that his enlightenment ended up in the hands of the mastermind who destroyed Mushung Fortress and drove our clan to death. Quack. Paruru. Jin Yurin clenched her fist so tightly that her nails dug into her flesh. She sincerely wanted to catch that mastermind, Mok Gon, tear his entire body apart, burn every piece of his flesh, and kill him. To her in this state, Mok Jayangun suddenly asked. But I don't understand why this was divided into 2. What? Didn't you say earlier? That ancestor you call that person left the 8 thought-shattering techniques in a hidden secret storage for his descendants. But if he guessed it might not end up in the hands of his descendants, there was no reason to leave the 8 thought-shattering techniques there in the first place. At Mok Jayangun's words, Jin Yurin also became puzzled. Thinking about it, if he was going to leave the 8 thought-shattering techniques here, there was no reason to leave it in Mushung Fortress's underground secret storage. Also, conversely, why didn't he put the secret manual of the heavenly concealed luminous star sword art there? Cheol Surayan said this secret manual was an important arrangement for the descendant who would find this place. Then shouldn't this have been put in the underground secret storage as well? It's strange. There were parts that didn't quite add up. He might have left only that in the underground secret storage out of concern for his descendants, just in case, but in the end, it fell into the hands of Mok Gon, the leader of the secret society who destroyed Mushung Fortress. If he could even read the heavenly secrets, couldn't he have predicted this as well? To deliberately leave a secret manual that would fall into someone else's hands. As she was pondering, she suddenly stared intently at Mok Jayangun, who was holding the bamboo slips with the formula of the 8 thought-shattering techniques written on them. Come to think of it, Mok Jayangun also said he obtained the formula of the 8 thought-shattering techniques by chance. Wait. Could it be? Kwang. At that moment, a tremendous roar came from outside, shaking the entire thatched house. Kurururu. Perhaps due to the aftershock, not just a small part, but about 1/3 of the pillar at the center of the thatched house cracked and fissured. Seeing this, they instinctively realized that something had gone wrong with the formation. At this, Cheol Surayan shouted at Mok Jayangun. Give those bamboo slips to the young miss. She thought Jin Yurin should take them as this was also his arrangement. Mok Jayangun, who already knew the formula and had memorized the patterns engraved on the side and the regularity of the arrangement, was about to roll them up again and hand them over without particular greed. But at the moment he was rolling up the bamboo slips. Chwarak. At that instant, as the bamboo slips were being rolled up, space distorted and Mok Jayangun's body was sucked into it. Tack. Along with that, the rolled-up bamboo slips fell to the floor. Jin Yuren and wicked Granny Cheol Surayan couldn't hide their bewilderment at the sudden turn of events. What on earth had just happened? Hurriedly, Jin Yuren tried to suck in the bamboo slips with her void-grasping technique and unroll them again. But right at that moment, Kwang! The wall of the thatched house right in front of them was torn away. Along with that, the outside was revealed, and there stood a middle-aged man with a third eye on his forehead, his hands behind his back. Mok Jayanan looked around. In the blink of an eye, Jin Yuren and Cheol Surayan who had been nearby disappeared, and suddenly everything around him changed. He had clearly been inside a thatched house, but looking around, this place seemed to be some mountain peak. So Mok Jayanan approached the cliff at the edge of the mountain peak to figure out where this place was, but this? What on earth? Mok Jayanan doubted his eyes. That was because while the sky was clearly clear and blue, the ground below the peak was not visible. All that could be seen was a black floor, which looked like an endless abyss. What on earth is this place? Thinking it might be an illusion, he walked along the edge of the peak looking down, but even after a full circle, he couldn't see the bottom. He was just wondering about this when looking down won't show you a way down. Mok Jayanan frowned at the voice coming from behind. He was clearly the only one on top of the mountain peak. Moreover, he hadn't sensed any presence from behind, so why did he hear a voice? After a moment's consideration, Mok Jayanan grasped his sword hilt and naturally turned his head. There was a rock about waist high, and sitting on top of it was someone of unknown identity wearing a demon mask. Chapter 448. Arrangement. Part 3. Mortal. Chong Ryong called out in a somewhat worried voice. The composure disappeared from Mok Jayanan's face. Is he strong? To this question, Mok Jayanan stared intently at the masked figure and replied using sound transmission. I can't sense anything. What? Exactly as I said. That masked man. Even though I'm looking at him with my own eyes, it feels like he doesn't exist. Chong Ryong couldn't hide her internal surprise at Mok Jayanan's words. The current mortal was arguably at the highest level in the entire current martial arts world. Even wicked Granny Cheol Surayan, who was one of the strongest in the old martial arts world and called a great villain, had acknowledged him. Yet this Mok Jayanan couldn't sense anything at this distance? Just who on earth is that person? As she was wondering. Who are you talking to using sound transmission? Mok Jayanan's eyes narrowed at those words from the demon-masked figure. Does this person know about sound transmission? Otherwise, there's no way he could recognize sound transmission just from a slight throat movement. But Mok Jayanan was genuinely surprised by the demon-masked figure's next words. The faint spirit energy I sense from your bosom. Are you talking to that being? What? Why are you so surprised? The basics of sound transmission involve imbuing energy into the air vibrations caused by sound, so if one can read those waves well, there's nothing that can't be understood. He not only knew whether sound transmission was being used or not, but he heard what was said. Mok Jayanan's gaze sharpened with wariness. Whoever this demon-masked man was, he seemed to have many strange abilities, not to mention being undetectable through energy sensing. Sook. Not knowing if he was friend or foe, preparation was necessary. Mok Jayanan tried to raise a sharp sword energy through his sword hilt. Then the demon-masked man chuckled and said, perhaps because it originates from demon, it's certainly sensitive and aggressive. Innate nature. Surak. It was before his words could finish. Mok Jayanan swung his sword hilt towards the demon mask. A large formless sword appeared in the air, attempting to slice the demon-masked man sitting on the rock in half. Chwaak. Who? Better than expected. Sook. The demon-masked man reached out his hand towards the giant formless sword flying at him. Then the formless sword made of true energy that was cutting through the air suddenly oxidized like smoke and disappeared. Pass. Mok Jayanan's pupils shook at this sight. Did he just forcibly disperse the true energy of the formless sword called the Sword Extreme? Mok Jae-nun couldn't help but be bewildered by this completely unexpected technique. This was the first time he'd seen someone break through a formless sword, which only those who have reached the life and death realm could use, in such a way. At that moment, Chang Ryan shouted, "Mortal! Behind you!" Behind? In Mok Jae-nun's eyes, the demon-masked man was still sitting on the rock. But why did she shout about behind when he couldn't sense anything? The doubt was momentary, and Mok Jae-nun moved instinctively. Suruk. He deployed the clear and manifest water-crossing steps, moving his body at ultra-high speed, but no sooner had he taken 2 steps. Chwack. Kwang. A sharp sound of air being cut and a thunderous noise rang out from behind. As he turned his head while taking his 3rd step, he saw the demon-masked man holding something like a tree branch, and noticed a sword mark where he had swung. A tree branch? Did he just produce such power with a tree branch? Of course, even Mok Jae-nun himself could cut someone by imbuing sword energy into a tree branch. But that sword mark had an unreasonably powerful force. If he hadn't used his ultra-high-speed movement technique, his body would have been cut in half. Mortal, above. At Chang Ryan's shout, Mok Jae-nun twisted his body and leaned back. Then, the demon-masked man's fist flew over his leaned-back head, and Mok Jae-nun tried to use the scripture of transferring true chi technique to create a wave and Pong! Attempted to repel him in reverse. However, Pong! The moment he activated the scripture of transferring true chi, a wave of ripples also erupted from the demon-masked man's fist, causing Mok Jae-nun's body to be driven into the ground. Kwang! The technique of the scripture of transferring true chi is to reverse and send back not only the received force but also one's own power. But when he was hit with the scripture of transferring true chi while deploying it himself, the power was so strong that his body was driven into the ground, causing it to cave in more than 5 jane deep. The form of the demon-masked man who had slammed Mok Jae-nun disappeared as if scattering. Surururek. Even the form that had swung the tree branch was the same. As the 2 forms that had seemed like avatars disappeared, the demon-masked man sitting on the rock muttered, "This is really beyond expectations." As he said this, Mok Jae-nun could be seen walking out of the sunken pit, wiping blood from the corner of his mouth. The demon-masked man clapped his hands as he watched Mok Jae-nun clap clap clap. "This is excellent. I predicted you might have learned the scripture of transferring true chi technique because you possess plundering killing sword, but to disperse that overlapped power." The demon-masked man was genuinely impressed with Mok Jae-nun. With that technique just now, even a master who had reached the life and death realm should have been caught off guard and unable to respond properly, resulting in severe injuries. Yet in that instant, he dispersed more than 80% of the energy. He truly possessed monstrous battle instincts. SSSSSSSS. As Mok Jae-nun wiped away the blood, black energy began to flow from his entire body. From the black energy rising like a heat haze, an extremely ferocious and ominous aura was surging. Seeing this, the eyes faintly visible inside the demon mask narrowed. Demon. So that's your essence. You, what's your identity? Identity? Well, compared to you, I'm just an ordinary human. I am, just myself. Kwang. No sooner had those words ended than Mok Jae-nun stomped on the ground with true force. The moment he stomped, the ground began to shake and split as if hit by an earthquake. That crack and shockwave instantly reached the demon-masked man sitting on the rock. Pat. Along with this, Mok Jae-nun's form moved. He used one of the 8 thought-shattering techniques, the art of suppression, to control the opponent's movement even if he couldn't completely subdue them, aiming to exploit an opening. But then an astonishing sight occurred. Dak. The demon-masked man suddenly flicked his finger. Pong. Then, a shockwave spread out from him, completely neutralizing the wave of art of suppression. Not only did he block it so easily. Suruk. 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 3 forms sprang out from the seated demon-masked man, instantly closing the distance to Mok Jaehyun and launching a combined attack. At that moment, chwack! Mok Jaehyun's form blurred and a black line appeared in the air. He concentrated his power to pass through these avatar-like beings in one go, aiming to cut down the demon-masked man in a single stroke. Humchit! Against this strike with concentrated power emanating black energy. This might be a bit difficult as is. Chong! The demon-masked man, who had never moved from sitting on the rock until now, finally drew his sword. Hyoang! As Mok Jaehyun's demonic sword, Evil Commandment Sword, imbued with concentrated power, clashed with the demon-masked man's sword, the air rippled as if torn apart, accompanied by an ear-splitting metallic sound. He even blocked this. Mok Jaehyun was genuinely impressed by his opponent's strength. The sword strike he just unleashed, with concentrated power, had reached an even higher level after his bout with wicked Granny Cheol Surayan. Yet this demon-masked man easily blocked this heightened power strike. Moreover, he had his left foot on the rock and only stepped forward with his right foot, but there was no sign of wavering at all. He wasn't dispersing the force, yet he seemed utterly at ease. The energy is continuously flowing. Only upon clashing swords did Mok Jaehyun realize. From this person's sword, an energy like that of the infinite was surging, reminiscent of the supreme great ability of the fallen monk Jia Jiamzhong, as energies from the surroundings were gathering. Is he producing such power using only the surrounding energy, not his own? As he was wondering. Whoa! At that moment, a resonating sound flowed from the demonic sword plundering killing sword at his waist. That resonating sound was like a strong killing intent. At this, without time to think, Mok Jaehyun drew plundering killing sword with his left hand and attempted to cut down the demon-masked man with a concentrated power strike. Pat! The demon-masked man flung his body backward to avoid this. The sword force of plundering killing sword, gathered with concentrated power, split the ground, cleaving half of the peak. Kwak 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 kwang. Mok Jaehyun's eyes gleamed at the tremendous power of the sword force. The moment he felt the killing intent flowing from plundering killing sword, he was reminded of that sensation when facing wicked Granny Cheol Surayan, and swung the sword without hesitation, resulting in power beyond imagination. Huh? Even the demon-masked man seemed not to have expected such power, clicking his tongue with an exclamation. He instinctively avoided it due to the chilling killing intent flowing from the sword, but its power was truly earth-shattering. This was a sword force capable of cleaving even a mountain peak. If he hadn't avoided it, he would have been in quite a predicament. Woo woo woo. Then, a strong resonating sound spread from the demonic sword plundering killing sword in Mok Jaehyun's left hand. Mok Jaehyun couldn't hide his puzzlement at the resonating sound. He was aware that its sword spirit was stronger than Evil Commandment swords, but the sword was showing strong hostility towards that demon mask as if it were alive. Then, as if sensing this hostility from plundering killing sword, the demon-masked man. Still full of killing intent, I see. Plundering killing sword. Was he actually addressing the sword? At those words, the resonating sound from plundering killing sword grew even stronger. Woo woo woo. It was even trembling to the point where he could feel it in the sword handle he was gripping. Though unclear why, this demon-masked man seemed to have an incredibly strong resonance with swords. To even affect other swords to this extent. Nothing else matters. This sensation right now was the only way to deal with that man. So Mok Jaehyun threw plundering killing sword in his left hand at the demon-masked man like a javelin. Pong! The demon-masked man reached out his hand towards the flying plundering killing sword. It seemed he was trying to change its direction with true energy. Then Mok Jaehyun moved his sword hilt, using the subtlety of the sword control with energy technique to make the demonic sword plundering killing sword soar upwards. Pack! At this, the pupils visible through the gaps of the demon mask naturally rose upwards. In that gap, Mok Jaehyun once again concentrated his power into a single point. Chwack! A black line cutting through the air. Chiang! As if to say this level could be easily blocked even though his gaze had momentarily shifted upwards, the demon-masked man lightly blocked it with the iron sword he was holding. As their swords clashed again, the demon-masked man first thrust the sword hilt in his left hand towards the acupoint on Mok Jae-un's left shoulder. It seemed like he was trying to preemptively stop Mok Jae-un from unleashing that sword force overflowing with killing intent again. Mok Jae-un tried to grasp the demon-masked man's sword hilt using the Gymna tree technique as if snatching it, but the demon-masked man rotated it in a spiral and instead whirlick wrapped and caught Mok Jae-un's left arm. In that state, as the demon-masked man tried to break that arm, shook. At that moment, the demonic sword plundering killing sword, which had soared high above the demon mask's head, came flying down with terrifying momentum. I predicted this would happen. As if he had already anticipated this, the demon-masked man applied force to where their swords were meeting to push Mok Jae-un away and avoid it. However, it was not an ordinary sword. Chwack! At that instant, the demonic sword plundering killing sword drew a black line in the air. This was a concentrated power strike unleashed in the state of sword control with energy. Faced with this unexpected concentrated power strike, the demon-masked man released both the sword he was clashing with and Mok Jae-un's wrist he was holding, trying to avoid it. Pack! However, Mok Jae-un firmly grasped him using the attach technique and the Gymna tree technique. Thanks to this, it seemed he couldn't avoid it, but Chong! It was at that very moment. Just as the swords were about to clash, a white line was drawn in the air, and something caused the path of plundering killing swords' concentrated power strike to curve. PUK. As a result, plundering killing sword deviated from its trajectory and plunged into an unintended place. As Mok Jae-un was wondering what had happened, he saw a short sword spinning in the air as if it were alive.